Today, we are in the third part of a series called Unfair, Illogical, and Completely Unexpected. We're in the third part. And so if you're new this week, if this is your first time with us, we'll take just a couple minutes to catch you up, right? To bring you up to speed. And if you've been here, this could be a little refresher for you. But basically what we're talking about is this whole idea of life, right? Life, which can often be unfair, illogical, doesn't make sense, and completely unexpected, right? These last 2 years have been like that, where it's just one thing after the next. It doesn't seem to make sense. It doesn't feel like we deserve this. And you might even feel yourself getting to the point where you're starting to expect the unexpected. And I don't know if you've had your finger on the pulse of society lately, but this is kind of bringing us to a point where we are becoming bitter, angry, burnt out, and hard. It's like our patience have been exhausted. It's not easy, and it's bringing us and our culture to a really difficult place. And so the question is, are we just stuck there, or is there something we can do about it? When we started this series, we talked about somebody named Paul. You might be familiar with him. He's one of the most influential church leaders to have ever lived. He started churches all over the place. And he was a guy whose life genuinely was unfair. The things that he went through didn't make sense. They were illogical. And it was just one thing after the next that no one could see coming. It was totally, completely unexpected. His friends, the people he respected, they turned their backs on him. He was beaten by people he once really looked up to. He was abandoned. He was shipwrecked, not once, not twice, 3 times, maybe even 4 times, which is intense, right? If you've been shipwrecked before, you are the friend who has been shipwrecked, and that's like how people know you. For him, it's happened multiple times, and it's just a footnote in his story because his life was so stinking hard. And yet, in the letters that he wrote, which we now have in the New Testament, the way he talks about his life, you wouldn't really know that. This is the guy who said we should be grateful in all circumstances. The one who told us to rejoice, like to have, not to fake plastic smile, but to have joy, always. That we could have peace, that we didn't need to worry. Like it's like he beat it. He beat the unfair, illogical, and completely unexpected. He was able to not become bitter, angry, burnt out, and hard. And I don't know about you, but I look at that and I'm like, well, how did he do it, right? Did he just lose his mind? Did he just get to the point where nothing hurt anymore because his life was so hard? Or is there something else? Is there something in him that maybe clicked, something in him that he believes that he has that I don't quite have? And the cool thing about Paul is that because he wrote so many letters, we often get a look behind the scenes. We get to see what's going on in his mind, how he thinks. And in one of his letters, he explains why he is the way he is. He sums it up very clearly. He says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And he goes on, he says, and his grace to me was not without effect. Like it really made a difference. It really changed me. It transformed him. It gave him motivation in his weakness. He talked about the grace of God often. Now, if you're like me, right, you hear the grace of God, and it's like this kind of abstract theological term, right? If you're not used to being in church, maybe grace is like, the prayer before a meal, or maybe you have a friend named Grace, right? Where a dancer like prances gracefully, right? Like that's not a word we often use too much unless you've been in the church, in which case we often say that grace is forgiveness. And while grace is part of forgiveness, it's so much more than that. And if you look at the way Paul talks, how he attributes all of this amazing things to grace, it really does need to go beyond forgiveness. It does have to mean more than that, or it doesn't quite make sense. Like, how does forgiveness make him strong in his weakness? And so we've kind of been trying to broaden the way we understand this concept of grace. And so I showed you like the commonly accepted theological definition of grace, right? Which is unmerited favor, which are 2 words that nobody uses, right? Unmerited favor. However, the idea of grace, really, if you think about it, if you wrestle with it it's an unbelievable concept. It's this idea of unmerited, being like totally apart from your merit, like from work, from deserving it. Not like whether you deserve it, don't, like not the, like totally apart from how you perform, whether you do good things or bad things, what you believe, like how you feel your perform, totally apart from that, it's this constant favor that God has for you, favor. Now, favor is another one of those words we don't really use too much unless you're asking someone to do you a favor. But the idea of favor is like to make it a little bit more concrete, think about the way you feel towards someone who is your favorite. Now, it's not like a perfect equivalent, right? But don't think about other people, because when we say favorite, there's this implication you care more about one. That's not the idea. But just you and that person who has your favor. You're in their corner. You care for them. You're pulling for them. You want what's best for them, right? And so this idea of unmerited, like God, what we said on week 1 was that really this idea of grace is that God is in your corner and there's nothing you can do to get him out because there's nothing that you did to get him in. That's the idea of grace. Like one theologian says this, it's an attitude of loving kindness that is completely free and undeserved. You can't change it if you want. Even if you don't want it, you can't get rid of it. And so like even that kind of starts to bring things into, like make them a little clearer. Like, okay, I could see maybe how this idea that no matter what, God is behind me, how that can motivate someone, how it could transform someone, that could help them bounce back from their failures and weaknesses. Like that starts to make sense a little bit. We talked about Jesus, right? Who John, one of Jesus' followers, he says like after being with Jesus for years, at the end of his life, John says that he was full of grace and truth, like the embodiment of that. And so we've been looking at specific instances in the life of Jesus to see this, like what it looks like to experience grace, not forgiveness, but grace, to have God in your corner. Last week, we looked at someone who was in a mess, someone who had created a mess themselves. And it was the day when everything fell apart for this woman. And the question we asked was, well, with grace, like where does God stand? When you're at your utter worst, when you did it to yourself, when your life is a mess and you have no one to blame for it but yourself, where does God stand? With you. With you. And so we looked at that story. It was a cool picture of like everyone else who had left this person. And it's just Jesus standing there with this woman who's at her like rock bottom. She did it to herself. It's the idea of grace, right? So maybe you've been with us for the past few weeks and you hear like, okay, it's God in your corner and there's nothing you can do to get him out. It's God with you, right? Nice, got it. Now when I hear grace, that's what I'm going to think about, right? But how do I get that concept from here to like here, like in? Like how do I go from knowing that that's what God's grace looks like to actually living like God is in my corner? How do I make that leap, right? Like, so think about it like this. Here's a real scholarly illustration, right? Imagine there's 3 groups of people. We got the first group, we'll call them like the nah people, okay? People that just not interested in God, not feeling it, not my thing, no thanks, right? And maybe that's you. Maybe you're here right now and if that's you, we're glad you're here. We made this church for you, but that's a totally different story, right? So you're just not into it, right? That's one group. Then there's like this middle group, the like, meh, okay, group, right? Like we believe it, but you know, there's still like these ups and downs. Like I have some good days when I go to church. Sometimes I leave and I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is it. But really, like on Monday and on Tuesday, it's kind of gone. It kind of fades away. And I'm left in this battle, and it's kind of like ups and downs and ups and downs. And I hope, like genuinely hope at the end of the day, I really do hope all this is true, but I'm really not. And it's like this constant back and forth. There's like the nah, there's the meh. And then the last group is like the yeah group. Or like Kool-Aid Man, like, oh yeah, group, right? These are the people that they live as if God is really in their corner. Like it is the reality through which they see the world. They live as if he's with them. It has become real to them. I'm not talking about like religious fanatics that just talk about God all the time and maybe even push people away because of it. I'm talking about people where whether you agree with them or not, you look at them and you're like, they really do believe that. It really does give them a sense of peace. It really does give them joy and contentment. Like it's doing something for them and there's something attractive to it. And so I hear that and I'm like, well, how? How do you do that? How did they get there? How'd they go from meh to yeah? Like how did it become real to them? For most of my life, when I ask like, how does it become real? For most of my life, I believe it was like life-altering religious experiences and huge leaps of faith. They did something radical, they moved to Calcutta, or they sold everything they had and they, started an orphanage in the rainforest, or they took went on a 40-day fast out in the Sahara Desert, and that's where they found God. Or they did something huge, something extreme, or they died, and then they came back, and they wrote a book about it, and boom, they had this life-altering, and now it's like they broke through, They made the leap from meh to yeah. Like, it's real to them, but it's really because of this huge leap of faith, or this dramatic life-altering experience. And I would hear that, I'd see that, I hear those stories, I hear those speakers share their experiences, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but I don't know if I'm there, Like, I got a midterm next week, I can't take a trip to the Sahara Desert, the rainforest sounds cool, I got allergies though, and it's like, I'm not, and so, because I'm not willing to pay that huge price, to take that like huge leap, I'm just stuck, trapped, bound in the land of meh. Like just hoping that maybe one day things will click, I'll say the right words. But grace changes that. The idea of God in your corner changes that. And no matter where you are on your faith journey, it is so important that we understand this. Even if you don't believe any of it and you're just trying to grasp what it is, like people who follow Jesus actually believe, it is so important that we flip this around. Peter was one of the earlier followers of Jesus. He was the first leader in the church, the first leader of this world-changing movement. And we actually have two recorded documents that share how he came to be one of those people, the oh yeah people. One of those people who live like this is actually real. He led the church for years and eventually gave his life for what he believed. It was so radically real to him, and we know how he got there. And so this should answer our question, right? Matthew was with Peter and Jesus during this whole thing, and he actually wrote a lot of it down. We call it the Gospel of Matthew. And here's how Matthew records that it happens. He says, Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee. This is where they went fishing. It's a pretty popular place. Jesus is there often. He saw two brothers. They were Simon, his other name was Peter. This is the guy we're talking about. And Andrew, his brother. They were putting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen, and that's what fishermen do. They put their nets into the sea, and Jesus said to them, to these two brothers, "Follow me, I will make you fish for men." Invitation, right? And here's what happens. At once, they left their nets and they followed him. The end. And there it is, boom, huge leap of faith. No questions, no concerns, frequently asked questions. No, I'm not gonna, one sec, let me talk to my wife. Hold on, I'm not sure if I can just give up on the fishing thing. I have a boat, I have some, just sure. And so he takes this huge leap, and there it is. And that fits with my way of thinking, right? He took that huge leap, he paid the price to become someone who has that real relationship with God, where it seems like God is actually with him. What's interesting, no, that's not actually what happened. What's interesting is that the ancient writers of the New Testament, they wrote biographies like we do, but they wrote them differently for different reasons. And Matthew is writing to the ancient Jewish people to make a point. He's actually trying to make the point that Jesus is the coming Messiah that they've been waiting for. And so he fills his biography with all these references, the ancient Jewish scriptures, but he's not there to tell us how Peter became the way he was. Luke, however, was a guy who was a doctor, very detailed, wrote a lot, like cared about things that were happening. And he said he wrote one of these versions of the Jesus story. And what he did, the way he explained, he was like, I tried to collect everything, as much information I can to put together an orderly account. And he did it for people who were not bought into the whole Jewish faith, which is what Jesus was originally. People he called Gentiles. So people who were not people of faith, he puts this together and he gives us a more detailed version of this story. Here's what he says. Same story, recorded by a different guy. He says, while Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, same place, Sea of Galilee, different name, many people pushed to get near him. Already, more details, right? Jesus is very well known, like people, they want to hear what he's saying, and there's a crowd. Think like, Justin Bieber walking through the crowd, right? They wanted to hear the word of God. They wanted to hear Jesus teach. Jesus saw two boats on the shore. The fishermen were not there, those two, Peter and Andrew. They were not there because they were washing their nets. They weren't even part of the service. They're just listening from a distance. It says, Jesus got into a boat which belonged to Simon, Peter, two names. Jesus asked him to push it out a little way from the land. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. This was a very practical thing. Right? If there's a crowd and they're like creeping up on you, he gets in the boat to step back, give himself some room so he can address the crowd. He's like, Simon, can you help me out here? Peter says, yes. Then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, when the service was over, they sang the closing song. They sent everybody home. He said to Simon, put out into the deep water. Let down your nets for some fish. Simon said to him, teacher, we have worked all night and we have caught nothing. These are the words of a tired man, right? But because you told me to, I will let the net down. When they had done this, they caught so many fish, their net started to break. They called to their friends working in the other boat to come and help them. They came, and both boats were so full of fish, they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he got down at the feet of Jesus. He said, go away from me, Lord, because I'm a sinful man. This is a common response we see people have when they encounter like divine power. It's this feeling of inadequacy. And then Jesus said to Simon, he says, don't be afraid. From now on, hear the same words. From now on, you will fish for men, for people. When they came to land with their boats, they left, same words, they left everything and followed Jesus. Same story, a lot more details. And see, like Luke shows us here that this wasn't an instantaneous decision. It wasn't, sure, it happened in a short amount of time, but it was a step-by-step process. It started with them like listening passively. They're not even there. They're just cleaning their nets. They're listening. All of a sudden, Jesus steps on the boat and says, hey, can I use your boat can I just inconvenience you a little bit, right? And then everything wraps up and he's like, let's go out and try this again, which to Peter would have been a little bit insulting, right? Like Peter's the fisherman here. He's already caught nothing. Jesus is a teacher. Before that, he was a carpenter. It's like, really, you're going to tell me to fish? Plus, it was daytime. And they fished at night because the fish would come to the surface where it was cold. And so now it's not cold anymore. It's warm. There's an even lower chance of them catching something. It's like, okay, really? Fine. Because you say so, I will. But really, it's one step at a time. And as he takes those steps, he comes to see more and more that there's something to this Jesus and the things that he has to say. And those steps, like, yes, these are steps in one story, but they would continue. He would continue to take steps and fail, small steps. In fact, Mark wrote an entire story, an entire version of the biography of Jesus where he emphasizes the process that they went through to slowly understand more and more, okay, what is this Jesus guy like? And so when we think about this becoming real to us, grace becoming real to us, I think we need to stop thinking like it's not in so much in huge leaps, but in small steps, Whenever you have to make a big decision, like think about the last big decision you had to make in life. Probably, maybe it's who you're gonna marry, maybe it's a school you're gonna go to, maybe it's what you're gonna do for a living, right? It's a process, a slow process that involves a lot of steps because it's a big deal. We often don't apply that same logic in the church. We expect people to decide big and decide now. You wanna follow Jesus? Like, make a decision, right? And don't leave here until you make a decision, yes or no. Get on board or don't. We don't apply that same logic. When what we actually see, even with the story of Jesus, is people over time coming to see, okay, there's something to this. Now, of course, there are times where it does just click in a moment, but that's the exception. That's not the norm. Or think about this, the last time you tried to make a big change in life. Maybe you tried to lose a lot of weight. Maybe you tried to save a lot of money. Maybe you tried to learn a new language, like a big thing. How'd you do it? You did it in small steps, and over time you saw a big change. We often don't apply that logic in church. We want big changes now. Change big, change now. Now that you made this decision, now leave that behind and you're done with this and you never have to worry about it again. And that's sometimes that happens, but often that's not what happens. And if we speak about it like it's the norm and not a miracle, we're setting people up for disappointment. Like, it can be damaging. It can be dangerous. I remember times like growing up where I would like struggle with something. Like, let's say I was struggling with anxiety and I went to someone I trusted, a person of faith, and said, I'm struggling with this. Can you pray for me? And they would say something like, all right, I'm gonna pray right now that God is gonna take away your anxiety. You're gonna leave here, you believe that, and you're done with it, go. And I'd be like, all right, here we go. I don't know why I didn't do this from the start, right? And then we would pray, and it would be like, they would ask, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is bad, but I do think we need to be real about the message we're communicating in that. Because what would happen is the next morning, I would wake up with anxiety, and who then am I questioning? Like, is what I believe actually real? Or maybe unintentionally, like, these are good people, but unintentionally setting people up for disappointments because we're talking about the miraculous like it's the norm. It happens in small steps, not in huge leaps. And here's what I love about this, right? Here's like another aspect of grace, of Jesus in Peter's corner. Think about something that takes up your mental energy. Something that you worry about, something you give a lot of time to, something that's a big part of your life you care about. If it goes wrong, it's a big deal. Maybe it's your job, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's your relationship with your kids, something at home, big thing, right? For Peter, you know what this was for Peter? Fishing. Do you know where Jesus starts to show Peter that he can be trusted? On the fishing boat. He starts in his world. There's nothing spiritual about fishing. There's nothing spiritually significant about fishing. It's a great metaphor, but it really doesn't mean anything when it comes to growing your faith. But it's as if Jesus shows up in his world and says, here is where I'm gonna show you that I'm in your corner. If you've ever seen The Chosen, it's a new show. There's an app you can download. It's free. It's about the life of Jesus. They do a great job showing us like what fishing was like for someone like Peter. Peter wouldn't have had the savings that we have. He wouldn't have had the financial cushion or flexibility that we had. When he says, we haven't caught anything all night, it's as if he's saying, I worked all day and didn't get paid. This is a real issue of stress for him. He's thinking about how he's gonna take care of his family. And Jesus is like, I'm gonna show you in this realm that I can be trusted. Or we could say when it comes to this whole idea of God and his grace being real to us, it happens in small steps, but it also doesn't it happens not in a religious system, but in your everyday life. He doesn't show up and pull Peter off the boat and say, hey, Peter, when you're done washing those nets, we're gonna go to synagogue. I'm gonna teach you some Hebrew syntax, and we're gonna analyze the, diagrammatical analysis of the passages. No, he's like, no, okay, you're worried about fishing. Let me into your boat. Let me into your world. And so for you, really think, what is it that's on your mind? Like if this is us today, these small steps, like they may be things that have directly to do with church and faith. And if they do, that's great. Like I'm all about church, especially this one. But maybe he's asking to come into your work boat or your family boat or your parenting boat or your relationship boat. He says, let's try this again, but this time with me in the boat. And probably my favorite part of this story is Peter's response, because I can relate to him. He says, we've been out fishing all night and we've caught nothing. Like I'm a fisherman, I've tried this, I know how it works. If I didn't catch something last time, I'm not gonna catch something during the day, right? But thanks, carpenter. He says, but because you've said so, I'll do it. And he does. He doesn't give Jesus, like when Jesus says, here's how I want you, he doesn't give like an enthusiastic amen, glory, hallelujah, yes, Lord, let's go out fishing a second time for the day. It's an okay, fine. And I can do that. Like Peter, he takes this small step in his own world, not with radical faith, but actually with reasonable doubt. I can do that. I can do that. And I can tell you, I've been in situations where the best I can give God is an okay, fine. And maybe you've been there where you're in a situation and it's like, I can tell the truth right now. I know probably if I were talking, he probably would tell me to tell the truth in this situation. And I know all the things that could potentially go wrong if I tell it. So maybe I should just tell this story, right? Or make this up and maybe it'll go, but you know what? I know, okay, you know what? Fine, I'll just do it. And what did Peter see when he said yes? When he didn't take a leap of faith, he didn't step out in faith, he stepped out in his doubt. So, okay, fine, I'll do it. Or maybe you're in a situation where you can choose to retaliate. Like they wronged you, whether it's work, home, parent, sibling, school, they wronged you. And you can get them back. You can drop that hammer and probably Jesus wouldn't endorse this. Probably doesn't want me to. I got the perfect, right? But okay, fine. And watch what happens when you act, when you step out in spite of your doubt. Maybe for you, this stepping out in your boat, right? Maybe for you, it's something at home, right? Maybe Jesus wants to come into the relationship boat that you're in right now, or your future. Like you've done it once before, but now he's saying, why don't you let me in this realm and let me call the shots? And maybe you can't do it enthusiastically, yes, but maybe you can give him okay, fine, let's try this. I think when we quote Jesus, we tend to quote him out of context and it makes him look horrible. You've probably heard Jesus said, you of little faith. Right? And so that's what we think of when I shouldn't doubt, right? Because he doesn't like that, me of little faith. Well, he's saying that to people who just saw him pull off something crazy. He just fed 5,000 people with a couple loaves of bread. And then 2 minutes later, they're doubting him. And he's like, really? You can't connect the dots here? Where's your faith? But when he meets, he is totally understanding to his doubt. Totally gets the fact that he's questioning it. And so maybe at home, right? Maybe you want to start praying with your kids or praying with your spouse. And that's weird. You've never done it before. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's a level of vulnerability there. It might feel awkward. Maybe you'll giggle. Maybe your kids will be like, what are we doing? But maybe you'll see that might provoke some interesting questions. All of a sudden, they might feel free to talk about their faith at home. It might have a ripple effect. So my question for you is really, what is your next step? Where are you in this story? Maybe you're just passively listening. You're just over there washing your nets and I'm not ready to take it. I'm not into this. And that's fine. There's something to be said about just sitting and listening, taking it in for a while. But if you want to make that jump from meh to yeah, from nah to yeah, this is becoming real, what's a step you can take? And in what realm? like in something that matters to you now, today. And when we take those steps, I think we'll see he really can be trusted. I'm gonna call the band up here, but this is what I wanna leave you with. David, maybe you've heard of David. He was actually before Jesus. He was a king. He's the David from David and Goliath who killed the giant. He's looking back on his life, and he wrote a bunch of Psalms. One of them was Psalm 119. We think David probably wrote it. And in that, he looks at the things that God says and what it did for his life. And he writes, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Now, for me in like 2022, I think like headlights, LED, poof, the lights go on. It's like, there we are. You'd see all the way down the road. You see the obstacles, you see the potholes, you see all the issues, right, whatever. But for David, it wasn't like that. A lamp for him, there were no LEDs. It was probably like a candle. In other words, it's just enough light to see the next step. What he could see, just like Peter, what Peter could see was what was right in front of him. Do you know what Peter couldn't see? He couldn't see where those steps would lead him. He couldn't see that the steps he took that day would end up making him one of the most influential people who have ever lived. He had no idea what hung in the balance. And maybe for you, like you see a step right, and all you see is that step because that's all you've been given. But maybe you taking a step at home for your family could radically transform what your kids look like 5 years from now. Maybe you taking a step of faith in spite of your doubt in your relationship could radically change how your marriage looks right now. Maybe it can dramatically change what your future looks like down the road, but you can't see because you've only been given enough light to take the next step. And probably if you could see where it was gonna lead, it'd be too intimidating. So I think there's a reason we can only see what's right in front of us. But we have no idea what hangs in the balance. What's your next step? Maybe it's a commitment, maybe it's a personal thing, maybe it's a church thing. Maybe it's committing to coming to church on a regular basis. We try to design this church not with programs, but with steps, easy next steps. Maybe a step for you is getting baptized. We're doing that tonight. To mark a point on your timeline where you made a decision. All right, I'm in. Maybe for you, it's praying at home, praying a small step. When we start thinking in steps in your own world, steps that are taken in spite of doubt, I think we'll see that grace will start to become real to us.